Hello, Internet. It's Daniel with Driving and Dragons. I'm back today with another reaction. I'm actually doing my second attempt to record a reaction to this. I'm trying to not let my frustration with this particular YouTuber cut through into this video as much as I can. This is EXP to level 3. I don't particularly care for EXP to level 3 to start with. Very much a 5th edition D&D product. That's what he is. He is a product of 5th edition. Very much the kind of annoying, squeaky skits. Very much a modern gaming bias. So he is an example of the modern gaming bias that I think is just toxic to the entire community. I'm not saying that there's nothing good. It's just that I can barely get through stuff to do it. Full disclosure, I've never actually been able to get all the way through this particular video because it really does hit on some of my pet peeves. And I've seen bits and pieces of it, and it really makes my brain hurt. So I'm going to try to have some grace in this reaction and not let that bias shine through. But this is XP to level 3, talking about how the Tomb of Horrors is the worst dungeon ever. So let's get into hearing what he has to say, and spoiler, how I think he's wrong.
Apparently, some of you have luckily never been put through the torture that is the Tomb of Horrors.
And right off the bat, I would say, yes, unfortunately, some of you have never actually been through the Tomb of Horrors the way it's intended to be. And more importantly, with a game master who sets things up properly for all the great reasons you should go through the Tomb of Horrors. I personally feel that every D&D player should go through the Tomb of Horrors at least once. And more because I think of it as training for good player behavior and habits, not character.
I'm going to explain it to those of you that know nothing about it, or you'll maybe only heard it in legends, or are going to run it and want some tips. Tip number 1, don't. Tip number 2, I've run the Tomb of Horrors 3, 4, I've run this hellhole quadruple times.
And I'm, once again, spoiler alert here, I'm going to say that he has probably never run it correctly. Now, there are some people who are going to say, well, if you didn't run it in first edition AD&D, you're not running it correctly. I'm going to go ahead and say that I don't particularly agree with that. I don't think that it necessarily has to be run in AD&D, but as long as it's run with the proper spirit, it can be run correctly. And spoiler alert, I don't think he's done that.
And the reaction from my players each time we finish it is, that honestly isn't that fun of a dungeon, and I'm really happy it's over. Alright, so here's some context. The Tomb of Horrors is an adventure module written in 1975 by Gary Gygax for the original Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Gygax originally wrote the thing for Origins 1, where he wanted to
challenge skilled players and foil invincible characters.
Notice how he says a summarized quote. There's a lot of context that's taken out of that, and it kind of shows how he's trying to bias the entire intent of the tomb. It also shows that he does not utilize the module properly, nor does he set it up properly with his players, in the fact that he's like, all of my players that have been through it have been like, that wasn't really that fun, and I'm glad it's over, because he has not prefaced it properly and presented it in the proper light. I'm not saying that it's going to be fun for everybody, regardless of how you run it, or that everybody is going to get a sense of accomplishment or enjoyment out of it. But properly setting up, most people will. And as he put it there, it's like, oh, to challenge invincible characters. It was not to challenge invincible characters. Okay. It was set up predominantly to challenge the players. This is unlike any other adventure, Tomb of Horrors was written to challenge the players, not their characters. You cannot rely on your character to get you through the Tomb of Horrors. You have to use your brain as a player. Now, what it did do is it was a challenge to people who had the kind of arrogance about them as a player that their character was somehow invincible or unstoppable. So what he designed was a dungeon where your abilities as a character cannot save you if your player is not approaching things from a certain way. In particular, and this is why I think it's such an important module for everybody to play. It is such a great tool for teaching people how to truly immerse themselves in their character in a role-playing game. And that is because to beat the Tomb of Horrors, or to survive the Tomb of Horrors, or to have a chance in the Tomb of Horrors, you cannot approach it as a game where you are controlling a character. You must approach it as a player. You have to approach it as if you are the character and make decisions as if your life and death matters, your safety and health matters. Because even the best role players and whatnot in tabletop role-playing games, they will make decisions for their character that they would never make for themselves, even in an identical situation, because the risk is disconnected between player and character. You don't want your character to get seriously injured, harmed, whatever. You don't want your character to die, but you take the risk because if it pays off, it's going to be really cool. If you were your character, you would be saying something along the lines of, hell no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to take a few extra minutes here because I would prefer not to have my arm ripped off or my throat cut out.
The plot is pretty simple. A Sarek is a demi-lich who got a tomb full of treasure, so go get it and don't die. Tomb of Horrors was considered the third greatest Dungeons & Dragons adventure of all time by the staff of Dungeons & Dragons in 2004. What? Okay, now that you have a gist of its history.
Yeah, notice it's the staff of Dungeons & Dragons in 2004. Just before you started having a lot of the people who actually had some business being involved started to be taken out of the situation. Because I'm going to tell you right now, most of the current Wizard staff, the people that they've got running Dungeons and Dragons right now, the vast majority of them have no clue what the Tomb of Horrors is supposed to be about either.
I'm not really going to focus on the original. The original is complicated and in a game that I don't know how to play.
I'm not going to focus on the original. I am going to go grab the bastardized 5th edition version because I can't be bothered. I can't be bothered with the original intent of this adventure, so I sure as hell can't be bothered with trying to be as close to the original concept as possible.
Thaco? I'm going to be focusing on the updated version in 5th edition that was released in Tales from the Yawning Portal. I remember back in 2017 when everybody was getting super hype over this book because the Tomb of Horrors is in it. And as far as I'm aware, the version from Tales of the Yawning Portal is pretty accurate to the original TSR version.
No, it's not. It's not a one-for-one copy by any stretch of the imagination. Is it a somewhat faithful recreation of the skin of the Tomb of Horrors? Yeah, a little bit. But it is not really, it doesn't copy the intent, and it doesn't copy the spirit in which it was done, and it's not presented the same way, and some of the changes are, frankly, modern gaming crap. And to be perfectly honest, the thing is, the only way 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons could have faithfully redone the Tomb of Horrors for Tales of the Yawning Portal is if you had a large section at the very beginning that said, here's all the stuff that we're going to take away. We're not going to have passive perception. We're not going to have our death saves. We're not going to have, different kinds of saving throws for these traps. They're going to be save or die like the original is. And the only perception that exists is when you actively say, I'm searching and I'm looking. You can't have the Tomb of Horrors with passive anything.
So I'm going to show you what this dungeon really is. Pull away the veil and show why it's not what it's hyped up to be. I don't get why people like this dungeon.
Let's go ahead and read through this real quick. Wall of text in case you want to hardcore defend this quote-unquote masterpiece. I 100% understand that Gary Gygax wrote this dungeon with the intention of making it impossible but still quote-unquote beatable. Characters will die and die again to try and beat this impossible task. You can set it in your world as the quote-unquote tomb no one should ever go to. As a challenge, you could warn your players that they will likely die when going to it. And while that may be cool for your D&D game, I don't find it fun or interesting to create an impossible challenge for your characters to grind through in such a complex role-playing game that D&D is. Might be cool in a video game, but this isn't a video game. Simply put, the purpose of this video is to decry some of the quote-unquote legend this dungeon has and show you that it's not a fun time. I was once a naive soul that thought the tomb would be the most epic fun time for my players. It's not. Don't be fooled. This whole thing outlines how he does not understand the concept of what the tomb is, how it's supposed to be run, or what it should never, ever be inserted into your game world. Okay? It is not something that you are supposed to run for your long-term characters. Now, Gary Gygax did originally write it to go after some long-term characters at his own table as kind of a humility lesson. But at its core, you are not supposed to be bringing in long-term characters that you've developed with a personality and a backstory and everything, that you're playing to some kind of faithful extent of their personality and their mannerisms. It is not meant to be part of your world. It is meant to be its own standalone challenge. In fact, the only way I would ever put the tomb into a world, and I wouldn't even do it this way, would be like if it was some kind of like catatonic dream sequence, or all of the players get thrown to it and they have to defeat it in order to progress out of the coma or whatever back to their regular characters. It's not meant for that. It's not meant to be in your game. It is meant to be run. This game, the Tomb of Horrors, should be run with probably characters that were rolled up by the game master. But you should roll your characters up. The game master should be specifically outlining, we are going into the Tomb of Horrors. This is a game that is meant to challenge you as the player. It is not meant to challenge your character. It is meant to make you think, you make wise decisions. It is meant to train your brain to pick up on cues and adventures. It is a test of how much you as a player are paying attention and using your logical and rational mind. It is not a test for your characters, and your pluses and your minuses and your feats and your abilities are not going to save you in this dungeon. This is you playing, not your characters. But he clearly does not get this based on the whole thing of he even thinks that, oh, you can set it in your world this way as this kind of challenge and that might be cool and everything. No, it was never meant for that.
Before we get into that, though, we have a sponsor.
Oh, no, we do not have a sponsor. We're definitely skipping the sponsor.
So I decided I wanted to run an experiment. I unearthed the old book and adventure, sat down and read it, did my research, and I wanted to run it again and see if I was missing something. I've changed parts of it in the past, but what would happen if I ran it word for word as it's supposed to be done? Sort of. Gygax said that this dungeon is for players who think their characters are invincible. So I decided to run it for my friends and told them to make the most overpowered broken PCs they could. They were level 20, and we made our journey back into this godforsaken place.
Case in point. It is not the dungeon itself is not designed for overpowered broken characters. It is designed for players who are arrogant about the fact that their characters are quote unquote unkillable. The whole thing about it is that it doesn't matter if you're level 20, level 30, level 40, level 2. If your player is not up to snuff, your character will die in the tomb. It is about challenging the player, so it doesn't matter how good your stats are. The whole thing was like, okay, we all made level 20 characters that are as broken and overpowered as possible, shows that he does not understand the idea that the tomb does not challenge the characters. If your players are not overpowered, they're not going to have an advantage, no matter how overpowered their character is. Unless, of course, one thing you can do that truly will destroy the challenge of the Tomb of Horrors is bring in a lot of the modern gaming BS, the training wheels that have been attached, where things happen without the player saying them, like passive perception checks and that sort of thing. Or, luck re-rolls, but, like I think it's halflings that have you get to re-roll ones or re-roll failed saves or things of that nature, stuff that didn't exist in the beginning. To be honest, I think a fun way and one of the best ways to play the Tomb of Horrors as a training tool or as a tool for testing players themselves is to run it with no dice and no character sheets. Just have them reason their way through the dungeon, and the DM is the only one who uses any dice and uses them to determine certain outcomes, because there is a degree of luck that's required as well.
If you want to watch the whole VOD of this train wreck, it's up on Arcane Arcade, my second channel where we stream D&D. Now, before we get into breaking down this tomb, let me just say that I have a love for these old TSR adventures. I don't have nostalgia for them necessarily because I didn't play the game back then. I wasn't even alive back then. I'm a young boy, but I like the idea of these old adventures being kind of a different game. Ghosts of Saltmarsh, for example, is a lot of fun to run for me. There was a different way to write adventures back then, and I think it's fun to kind of translate that to now and reminisce about the past. Now, I'm praising this right now because I'm about to completely not praise it and tear it a new devil's mouth. Anyways, the first room of the Tomb of Horrors is getting into the damn thing. There's basically a plateau with rocks on top of it that are shaped like skulls and nowhere else to go. What the adventure says that they must do to get into one of the 3 entrances is a thorough inspection and search of the entire area reveals that only the north side of the hill has a crumbling cliff of sand and gravel about 20 feet high in the middle of the hole. And it takes 10 minutes for each character to search each 10-foot wide space along the cliff. This examination must be done from a distance using a long spear or 10-foot pole to poke around the sand and gravel, looking for an opening. Any prodding into the cliff face must be sufficiently high off the ground in order to collapse enough material to expose a portion of the tunnel entrance. Once an entrance is exposed, it takes about an hour for characters to thoroughly clear the passage that lies beyond, but a crawl space can be opened in 10 minutes. What I gather from this is that they have to go up to the cliff face and kind of dig around to find it. Now, there's 3...
What he doesn't get from this is why this is such a very good piece of adventure design. So a couple of the things, the Tomb of Horrors, I think of it as the ultimate training module, not just for players, but also for game masters, because it is a mastercraft, a master work of adventure design. And what that I mean is, look at this thing. Why are we making these people go through this tedious thing of poking and prodding around the front side of this hill, looking around to find the sandy area, trying to find the way to dig through, taking these long periods of time to punch through, dig through, scrape through, and use these exact methods to get through this sand just to find these entrances? Well, this is your first introduction into the proper mindset of going through the tomb. It is immediately evident through this, in no danger to the players, or no danger to their characters. You're not going to lose a character doing this. But what you're going to learn is this dungeon is designed for you to take your time and be very meticulous, very careful, and to pay close attention to details and to observe and to not rush through it, and that you can't just brute force your way into the situation. You have to stop and think through things and take your time. And this entrance, this tedious finding of the entrances, actually helps set your player's brain and condition it to think of, this needs to go slowly, this needs to be well thought through. He's totally missing that core piece of game design.
Different entrances. One of them is a falling ceiling trap, the other is a sliding wall trap, and the middle is the real entrance. The middle entrance is a long...
All right, he just blows right past the two false entrances, once again showing that he totally misses the entire concept that this is a master class in dungeon design. Just like the sand traps and stuff, each of the false entrances help teach the game master and the players how to go through the dungeon. Now you have both of those traps are more easily escaped than others in the dungeon. Yes, they will both insta-kill people, but they're both far more negotiable with far more warning and far more things to tip you off. So it's kind of like hey, remember how I told you you're supposed to go slow and pay attention and analyze details and think before you act? Well, if you don't think before you act and you just walk in, the whole party just walks into the end of the first entrance and pulls the false door. You find a false door and the rocks fall and everyone dies. Why is everybody going in at once? Why is the rogue not checking for traps? Why are people not looking at this ceiling that is clearly not in the best shape, that has these cobwebs and stuff, that has clearly hiding something? Why are we doing this? Same thing with the room trap on the second entrance. There's signs that there's going to be a problem, that there's going to be some kind of mechanism that is going to cause problems. Why are we sending everybody in at once? Why are we just walking in and grabbing doors? Why are we not being more thorough in checking things when we have the countdown that is coming from the wall sliding shut and the noise and everything? Why are we not immediately responding to this? It is teaching you to pay the hell attention and think. Once again, now you have consequences, but they're more easily avoidable consequences. Further teaching the players about things to expect moving forward, like false doors, like not having the obvious answer. The obvious entrance is not really there. But we've missed that as well.
Long hallway with floor traps whose placement makes no sense and are a real hassle to deal with. There's a chest in the wall on a painted door that's a trap and also a real door. It's a chest trap door, not door, but actually a door. We'll get back to that. A misty doorway that teleports you either into a room with levers or further into the dungeon. A mouth pit of darkness that has plenty of room for those who wish to leap in and be completely and forever destroyed. Okay. There's also a terrible poem on the floor that hints to the rest of the dungeon. We'll also get to that later. First off, 5e has passive perception. So Tyler's character, who had like a 25, was able to see all the floor traps.
Okay, so once again, passive perception should not be something that exists when you run Tomb of Horrors. It interferes with the core concept of making the players think and think for themselves. It takes that out of their hand. Passive perception was added to 5th edition as a mechanism for the game master to be able to determine whether or not players notice something without tipping them off and causing metagaming by asking them to go ahead and roll a spot check. This was not a thing when the tomb was written. It is not there to just reveal traps. No, you have to search for them and you have to think. Now he says, oh, these pit traps, they make no sense. Exactly, they make no sense. They make no sense unless you're a demi-lich who does not want people coming into your tomb, who does not want people getting past the first room. You don't put the traps where people expect them. You put the traps where they're more likely to catch somebody and kill them and keep them out. Far more realistic. But it's also another piece of that game design. We have our first puzzles. We have the chest, not chest trap door. We have the evil torturer on the wall, who is hinted at in the poem that's on the floor. We have paying attention to the murals on the walls, paying attention to the floor where we've got the poem, searching, checking everything, not relying on things like the obvious red path. Oh, there's a trap on the red path. Well, I guess we're going to stay off the red path. Oh, there's a trap not on there. Hey, maybe these obvious clues are obvious for a reason, and they're not going to be real clues. So once again, further reiterating things like you need to pay attention and not do obvious stuff. You got the devil mouth at the end of the hallway where if you put your hand in, there's the sphere of annihilation that destroys things. Why is that there? It's going to teach you valuable lessons about not just shoving your hands and head in things that you don't know. You know, maybe you should stick that 10-foot pole in there and then pull it back out and realize now it's a 5-foot pole. But if you're dumb enough to be the kind of person, because think about this, if you're a real person, you're an archaeologist, you've gone into some ancient tomb, and there's this big devil mouth on the wall with a black hole that you can't see anything in. Are you going to just stick your head in there, shove your arm through, jump in the hole? No, you're not. But a lot of people will do it with their characters in a D&D game because consequences are disconnected. So you've got your puzzles that think, and you once again got aspects of the trap and the design that tell you more about the dungeon and what to expect and have varying consequences. And as he said here, a lot of the 5th edition stuff he's got going on interferes with some of that. And when I say interferes with some of that, I'm not talking about, oh, he knows where all the traps are and, oh, this one person can bypass the traps because of this class skill or something like that, or doesn't trigger traps because of whatever their ability is or something of that nature. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about they are no longer rewarded for being very cautious and very deliberate. They are no longer taught, like you lose the ability, you lose that idea to act intentionally and to tell that dungeon master, this is what I want to do, why I want to do it. You lose all of that with things like passive perception and some of the stuff he's talking about.
Not to mention, we also had Spencer as a monk, could run up walls, and Colton had boots of flying. So these traps were nothing more than an inconvenience. Now there's 2 ways to go here, either through the chest trap door, not door, but actually a door, or through the misty archway. Upon approaching it, 3 stones surrounding the archway glow in a certain order: yellow, orange, blue. If you push the colors in that order and step through the mist, you get teleported to this room way over here. Unfortunately, this color-matching Simon Says preschooler puzzle was far too mentally demanding for our heroes, and they teleported into a small room with levers a lot. Willie, you feel yourself walking, and then you feel yourself move and shift. You're no longer in the place you once were. Instead, you are in a small, tiny cubicle with levers.
Are you serious?
You can escape the levers room by simply flying up and out of the pit. Normally, you have to crawl through like an air duct and then you get teleported, but they could just fly. The other way...
Oh, yeah, they could just fly. And, he completely ignores the lever puzzle, which, once again, is another thing. You just start yanking on levers, you're going to fall into the giant pit that's going to trap you and kill you. Once again, teaching the players to not just fool around with stuff and to search all over the room. Unless they stop to look all over everything and find the hidden passage, secret door and everything, they're not going to find it. But of course, we're once again going with the everybody can fly, everybody's got the passive perception, which is doing all the intentional thinking for them. So you're eliminating that process. And we're also missing the point of the first Misty Arch. It shows you that Misty Arches teleport people, but it also shows you that you better know what you're doing with them and do them correctly, or there's consequences. And the consequences are not so bad at first, and they get worse as the dungeon goes on.
Way is through this chest trap door, not door, but actually a door. If the chest is examined closely, the viewer will note that it is hinged on the bottom, as to allow the lid to swing down if the catch on the top is pressed. The catch is an easily seen poison needle trap. The needle sticks 3 inches out of the wall, and the needle can be avoided easily by pressing the catch with the pommel of a dagger. Disabling the trap by taking the needle out of the mechanism requires the use of thieves' tools and a successful DC 10 dexterity check. See, I like that you can just avoid traps by being smart and realistic, which is what a lot of people give this dungeon credit for. If you're smart, you can beat it. It's not very hard so long as you think. However, I was confused as a DM in this moment. I'm staring in the map going, Okay, so how do you get through this doorway? And
Did he not read through the entire dungeon ahead of time? Does he not understand that the chest is actually not, the door isn't behind the chest, the door is actually beside the chest? That the chest does not actually have, the chest actually drops you into pits and stuff. But he barely touches on the things like, hey, a lot of these traps can be avoided just by you being smart. And that's what people give this dungeon credit for, because the entire dungeon is to teach you to think.
And there's no description of it in this part of the book, except there is, right here. And then I found out that this map is a piece of shit and sucks at displaying information to the dungeon master. I made a huge mistake, and in this VOD where I'm trying to run it word for word, I ran it wrong, and I've always thought it was like this. Door, chest, but it pushes to open to be a door, which is how it looks on the map. But what it actually is this is just a stupid, meaningless trap, and you have to peel the wall on this fresco to reveal a door. How are the players supposed to think of this?
They're supposed to think of this because the poem flat out tells them that they can get through it that way. That's how. By saying a door, it is a picture of a door. And if I'm not mistaken, it is the only picture that is clearly of a door in this dungeon. You're not supposed to have lead them by the nose clues to show them where the special doors are. They're supposed to think. And if you're already tapping and poking, you're going to have the crumbling fresco coming off the wall. It's like, hey, let's tear it down. But once again, it's not the only way through here, but it takes a little bit of extra work. Yes, there's a lot of misdirection. And once again, we have one of those adventure design things where this whole exchange teaches you to look for misdirections, teaches you to look for things that maybe are a little off, that if there's something obvious, that's probably wrong, but there's probably something not obvious nearby. And once again, does it in a manner first with limited consequences. And those consequences get worse as the dungeon goes on.
First of all, not enough clues for that. Second of all, there's a trapdoor right in front of it, so they're really not going to think to peel back the wall. Third of all, either I must have a pea brain that doesn't have reading comprehension, but how in all hell are you supposed to figure this out? I get that the Misty Archway is probably the main way to go, as it's a very simple puzzle, but these guys, who, by the way, have played lots of D&D, we've got hours and hours of stream games, and that doesn't even include our home games, who are also level 20, can't figure out what to do in this situation.
Yes, they played lots of stream game Dungeons and Dragons. And let's have a question here. What is the likelihood that any of them played anything prior to 5th edition? And if they did, what's the likelihood that any of them played anything before Pathfinder came out? Okay? I mean, not to be whatever istphobe word they want to use, ageist, I guess. But I'm looking at this, and there's not a single person in this video who looks like they were old enough to read the damn dice when 3rd edition was out, or were even alive when this adventure was written. So yeah, they got a lot of experience playing handhold training wheels Dungeons and Dragons, and they're struggling with this dungeon. Of course they are. This dungeon is helping expand their brain and teach them how to think more outside the box and think more intentionally. A lot of that intentionality that Wizards of the Coast weeded out of the game. And instead of them saying, ooh, this is going to make me think of things differently, let me take these kind of lessons learned in the tomb and apply them to my other games and to my other adventures to have better overall gameplay, it's get salty and feel insulted because you feel like it's cheap because it makes you take your training wheels off. And even in 5th edition, with all the training wheels and all the special help and all the cheats and all the thinking for you, you still have places where the tome foils it.
It took them an hour and a half to figure out what to do, and I didn't even run it correctly. I made it easier than it was supposed to be. I think that this dungeon tries way too hard to be misleading. You walk in, there's tiles on the floor, you describe frescoes on the wall, there's a demon head in the back and a misty archway. Now the players may think to follow the red tiles on the floor, as they lead to the archway, which is the right way to go. But if you follow it, then you are led to traps on the floor. Also, the floor poem has a piece in it that reads, "If shades of red stand for blood, the wise need not sacrifice aught but a loop of magical metal," which is for a room later down in the dungeon with orbs, but twice they are warned of the color red. It leads to traps, and the poem Sararak wrote describes it as dangerous. And around with the misty archway only leads you to the tiny room with levers. So if you experiment,
Punished.
if you follow the path,
Punished.
if you try to humor the thing on the wall,
Punished.
you have to exhaust all your options and either push these in the right order or peel the fresco on the wall. A word from Roguish WordPress. All you can do is randomly try things, knowing fully well that in this dungeon, trying things kills. So what you do is take all precautions you can think of and gamble your life away. And that's the fun of the Tomb of Horrors. And this is the first room. There is a single clue that leads you to this. The poem on the floor. If you're a big brain and you take the clues on an intelligence level that metagames the hell out of the dungeon, I suppose it's not that hard and you can solve it. We'll get to that poem in a minute, but first, I need to run through the rest of this dungeon, as it won't make any sense if I explain it now. You need to understand what this thing is. This video is already getting long, and it's gonna get a lot longer. The next room is a gargoyle. Easy to kill, and he's got a necklace on him that leads to more clues that don't make any sense.
Yeah, he's easy to kill if you're all a bunch of level 20 characters, but he is a lot harder to kill in first edition for sure. He's a lot harder to kill in 3.5 because I have had this converted to a 3.5 version and run it. And you look at the poem, the first room has its clue in the first line. So maybe if you look for the clues at the beginning of the dungeon, at the beginning of the poem, you might find them. Now, this is a little bit more excusable as you get deeper into the dungeon and you start confusing a few things because things get a little out of sync and then they get a lot out of sync. But I ran this here recently. I ran the tomb for a group of players, and it took them about 3 rooms before they started going back and recognizing things that they attached to couplets in the poem. And then they got to it, hey, we've been through these 3 things we know, so let's start looking at these 3 things and see if we can figure it out. And they figured out several of the puzzles off of the poem sitting around the table and discussing it using their brains.
Then you've got a maze of doors that open up from all different hinges. Then you get shot in this room while you're trying to figure out what the next door is. It doesn't specify how they're supposed to know. I think you're just supposed to describe the hinges and hope they say it the right way.
No, you're supposed to get them to sit there and check. Once again, more dungeon design, pointing to things that are more critical later in the dungeon. So, spoiler alert for the very end. At the very end, you have to put the key in the floor and you have to turn it 3 times to make it work. Well, why would I turn it once and then it didn't work and then I just stopped? Because earlier in the dungeon, you went through a hallway with all these different crazy secret doors where you were having to push it up, push it down, push it sideways, push it left, push it right, try to rotate it, try to spin it in the middle, try to flip it end over end to figure out the doors. And you learn really quick that it's like you have to be extremely intentional. Now imagine being a game master running a game where your players are very precise and very distinct and intentional when they describe what they want to do. Can you imagine never having to retcon the scene that you just went through because you misunderstood what your player said because they didn't describe it clearly? Oh, no, that's not what I meant. I was really saying this. This is what I was trying to tell you to do. Imagine if your players have been through a dungeon that teaches them through action and through encounter to slow down and describe things intentionally.
Then you've got the final door with 8 studs that you have to push from left to right to open. Then the door falls on you. Then you have a room full of orbs painted on the walls with lots of different colors. There's another archway in the back of this hallway, and guess what? It does nothing if you mess with it. Instead, if you go through it, you are teleported to the beginning of the dungeon completely nude. You lose all of your items, equipment, everything.
Cruel, but most entertaining for the DM.
Oh, you, Gary Gygax. This
Cruel, but most entertaining for the DM. And yet another lesson here. You ran through, you did something. We've been through several. Don't just jump through stuff. Don't be stupid. Don't have everybody in the party do something all at once things leading up to this. So if one person walks through, first off, they're just a few rooms away. 5 minutes later, they're walking through the back of the room naked, and they're like, shit, guys. I walked through that portal. It put me at the very beginning of the dungeon again, 10 feet that way, but I lost all my gear. But it also tells you and reminds these players that, hey, magic trinkets and gear and stuff are not what you need to beat this place. Thought and deliberate action and caution are.
This one's an illusion that leads to a room with another gargoyle in it that will crush gems in its hand, and if you do it 10 times, he gives you an invisible gem of seeing. Okay, that's twice convoluted. This one's also an illusion that leads to a room with 3 chests. One chest spawns a giant skeleton, the other has snakes. The last one has a ring of protection that has a dart trap in it. This one's also an illusion that leads to the chapel. The chapel has creepy art on the walls, and there's pews. A casting of Detect Evil and Good, or a paladin's use of Divine Sense, identifies the chapel as a consecrated place.
What a puzzle! Could the Demi-Lich actually have been of good alignment?
Oh, you, Gary Gygax! If you
Okay, so he's skipping over a lot of stuff, and I think he's trying to get through it quickly because clearly all he cares about is talking about how terrible the dungeon that he doesn't understand and can't run properly is. But once again, you go back to the poem, and one of the easiest things to figure out is the orb colors from it. And it's he also skipped over all the false doors that are in there, where you open the door and the only thing behind them is a spear trap. And it's like, these are all learning moments, because as you get deeper and deeper into the dungeon, the consequences get greater for not being deliberate and not taking your time and absorbing everything before you make decisions.
open the pews, gas fills the room, and if you fail a DC 15 con save, you're poisoned for 48 hours. Inside of the pews...
Oh, you're poisoned for 48 hours. Yeah, why don't you try playing that in the old version where it's a little bit more dire than that.
Are 8,000 silver, 6,000 electrum, and 4,000 gold. There's a blue altar that shoots a lightning bolt if you touch it, then a fireball if you touch it again. There's a skeleton with armor reaching towards another archway that's orange. There's no puzzle to this one, no buttons you can push to try to figure out where to go. If you go in it, your alignment changes and your sex reverses. If you go in it again, your alignment reverses and you take 1d6 psychic damage. If you go in it again, your sex reverses again and you're teleported back to the beginning with none of your stuff. Wow, super fun, love it. Just keep punishing the characters for something you forced them to experiment with at the introduction to the dungeon.
You're not punishing the characters for experimenting with something that you introduce them in at the beginning of the dungeon. You are punishing the characters for making rash decisions and doing things without knowing the consequences before they do it. And each time, the consequences get just a little bit worse. Don't screw with stuff that you don't know. You've got a poem. The poem doesn't tell you anything about screwing around with the altar. So you screw around with the altar and it blows you up. But remember, there was puzzles before that too, because you had a bench that had coins in it. You had a bench that had more valuable coins in it. You had a bench that had gems in it. Then you have a bench that has a gas trap in it. So it's like, don't get greedy. This poem didn't say anything about any of these pews. Maybe there's something here. I touch the altar. It gives me a zap. I touch the altar again. Why am I touching it again when it zapped me the first time and it blows up and it's even worse? Why are we not paying attention to these things? Because we are playing video game Dungeons and Dragons. Ironic that he said this would be great as a video game, but not as a a tabletop role-playing game. Complete opposite. If you quit playing D&D like it's a video game, you wouldn't have this. Because if you had already been in a room where you lost all your shit going through a misty archway, why are you going through another one?
And not just a normal kind of punish. I'm going to remove every part of your character and completely change them so that they're just unrecognizable to even you. I'm sure this is really fun for somebody to play. If you inspect this random wall over here, there's a slot. If you put a coin in it, it opens. Wow, you gotta be really smart to figure out this dungeon.
No. And look at this right here. I can't believe you got the puzzle. There's no reference or hint clue to solving this coin slot wall puzzle. It's not a coin slot wall puzzle. As a matter of fact, if I remember, and I will pull my original copy here to try and find it. If I remember correctly, you actually, if you put a coin in it, it just crushes the coin. What you have to put in is the magic ring, which is you need not sacrifice aught but a loop of magic metal. Okay? It's right there. It's not hidden. And it's in the poem. He lets them get away with putting the coin in. Because if I remember correctly, and I'm going to go over here. Three-armed statue, Trent Pulsar, Chamber of the Three Chests, Chapel of Evil. Careful inspection there has 4 in 6 chance of noticing a small slot with the letter O faintly traced above it. This is a moving stone block described below. It cannot be magically detected, nor can it be opened by physical means. There is you got this little wedge shape in there. There's no special item. It's like, where is this? It is just the right size for the insertion of a magic ring, and only such an item will actually trigger the mechanism that causes the block to slowly sink into the floor. The ring or any other object deposited in the slot is forever lost as the sinking stone crushes it all to pieces and the gate opens. No special item is required to trigger it from the other side, but only a magic ring. You can't put a coin in it. And he's like, how am I supposed to find that? On the wall. What are we supposed to find this slot over here? Because the entire damn adventure has been teaching you to look, observe, search, and find small, minute detail before you do anything. And if you're doing it that way, if you're thinking that way, and if you're not trying to get your players through it and are instead allowing them to think through it, of course they're having a bad time and they're failing repeatedly when they keep doing the same stupid shit over and over again. Sometimes you put the penny in the light socket and you figure out not to do it again. Sometimes your players keep putting pennies in the light socket and they lose all their gear and get their sex switched and lose their alignment and then get their altar blown up. But right here, there's no reference, hint, or clue to solving the coin slot wall puzzle because for one, it's not a coin and it's right there. Need not sacrifice aught but a loop of magic metal.
Next hallways have 3 doors and 3 pit traps. At the end of the really long hallway is a wooden door where you can hear far-off music and happy singing. If they destroy the door, a minor illusion gives off the sounds of distress. If they head further in, they step on a counterweighted beam that slip and slides them into lava. If you dash or succeed an athletics check, you can crawl back. It's a dead end. If you go down the 3rd trapped pit, which you likely ignored because you expected it, albeit that's kind of smart but also really misleading, there is a wooden door painted to look like stone. If you go through this wooden door, you're led to a hallway with fear gas, then a room with webs.
Okay. So once again, we go right through this. What is this lever trap, this death pit trap at the end of the dead end teach you? Something that obviously should not be in an abandoned tomb, a room with people partying and stuff in it. Maybe this should tip you off that something's not as it should be, and maybe you shouldn't go barreling in as if it's what it is. Maybe that's a clue. If something seems out of place, maybe it is out of place. And once again, he sits here and he complains about, why would they think of this? Why would they go up on this? But right there, after the loop of magical metal that he said wasn't a thing, 2 pits along the way will be found and lead to a fortuitous fall, so check the wall. It literally says 1 pit, 2 pit, lucky fall, check for a wall, check the wall. Bingo, now you found your damn door.
A couch and a dead guy on it. He comes to life, says he's a Sarek, and as the DM, you're supposed to pretend that this is the final boss fight. The players can easily kill him, and then a programmed illusion has the whole room feel like it's crumbling and being destroyed. And you have to count down from 10 to 1 as if they're escaping. Then if the players escape, you're supposed to ask them if the dungeon was hard as if they beat it. All right, so you're supposed to mislead them, then kill them for experimenting, then screw with their characters and reverse their sex, then you take away their stuff, and then you gaslight them into believing that they beat the dungeon because guess what? That's a fake ending.
And maybe if they were once again paying attention to that poem that's there at the very beginning, they would realize they're only halfway through it. Again, players being challenged, which includes fourth wall breaking stuff like having a false ending. Not character challenging, player challenging.
If you cast a spell magic or remove curse right here for no reason, a door opens to the rest of the dungeon.
Oh, and by the way, if you have that seeing eye stone from the gargoyle statue, you can see this secret door, so you know it's there.
Then you're in a mummification room with 3 pots of liquid. One is acid, one's gross water, and the other is gray ooze. If you kill the ooze and dump out the acid, you'll get 2 parts to a key that you can put together. Guess what? This is how a Sararak reforms his soul into becoming a demi-lich. As soon as the characters put this key together, it binds his soul back down, which is kind of clever, yes, but there's no hints to it. Nobody will ever think that that's what happened.
Well, part of that's because that wasn't part of the original adventure. It had nothing to do with binding his soul. As a matter of fact, the final fight with the Demi-Lich is just another one of those teaching the players things where it's like, if you're not stupid and greedy, you don't even have to fight a Surarak.
I suppose the Sararak wanted it to be secret, I suppose, but how dramatic would it be if they put together a key and then all of a sudden they found out they just reformed the Demi-Lich they were trying to stop? That'd be really interesting. Then there's a pit trap that shoots spikes at you if you try to climb down it. Then there's a secret door that leads you to another door that leads to a pretty room with a heaving floor that will jump and buck up down violently if you roll an odd number on a d6 on initiative count 0. So you're supposed to roll initiative in this room. There's also a fake door that tries to shoot you. The real door is behind a tapestry. If you tear down the tapestries, they turn into green slime. If you burn them, they turn into brown mold. Then you get into this hallway. Holy shit, this thing is so long and I hate it, but I will get into it just for you. There's 2 pit traps and a doorway at the end. South one is a fake door that shoots you. The east one opens into a room that has a misty room with a siren in it who chats up the party but can't answer any questions, and she has no idea where she is. If the players ask her to come out of the room, she obliges and follows them for the rest of the dungeon. Okay. Apparently, this is a
Private joke for a Sarac.
man, this dungeon is creepy, and not in the spooky, scary skeletons. I mean in the kidnapping a siren, muddling her mind, keeping her in your dungeon just until someone asks her to come out and she willingly obliges because she's under enchantment magic as a private joke creepy. Mid-editing Jacob here to also remind you that I completely forgot that this room also completely feeble-minds you if you fail an intelligence save, which brings your intelligence to 1. You can only identify friends. You can't speak. You can't cast spells. You can't use magic items. You just basically become brain dead, which is how I feel.
Maybe that's because you shouldn't be running off into crazy misty rooms. And we go right back to all the stuff you were taught leading up to the room. And these, I mean, so much of this stuff just comes from not treating things like it's a damn video game and treating your character as if they're more or less you.
After making this video.
And the north door is a fake secret door. Behind the door is a wall that has a secret door. Real fake doors. Then on the floor, on the other side, is another secret trap door that leads to where you're supposed to go. But this hallway leads into a room that sprays sleep gas on you. Then after 10 minutes, if you roll a 1 on a d4, a steamroller instantly kills anyone in the hallway.
Okay. So, beware trembling hands, what will maul, find the false, find the true. There you go. If you find the fake secret, you can find the true room to go through. Once again, if you are paying attention to the poem throughout the entire thing, you get your hints that you are going to have problems. Same old, same old, same old. And yes, you can be completely smashed by the juggernaut if you're not careful. Once again, not paying attention to context clues, these strange empty rooms that are just easy to find.
Everything it rolls over is squashed to a pulp. There is no appeal.
We all die.
We all die.
You guys walk into the next room. A giant stone juggernaut steamroller falls out of the wall and crushes all of you to death.
That's
There's
it.
just no
That's the end
save.
of the game.
There's nothing
no
else.
Save. No save. Just
That's it. That's all it says.
All right, cool.
that's the end.
It doesn't give you
I
a
hate this dungeon.
Wait, it doesn't give you a save. It
No.
doesn't give you anything.
Nothing.
It-
Nothing.
This is where my group died. Yes, they built level 20 overpowered characters and they just died for being in a room.
They built level 20 overpowered characters and they died because you expected the characters to beat the adventure instead of the players.
Albeit, I didn't give them 10 minutes in that room. That's what the book specifically says. I know a bunch of you are going to lampoon me for this, but they did investigate it. They stuck around for a little while. I casually rolled the dice and got a 1. And I was like, you know what? I'm sick of this damn dungeon anyways. We can just end it here. Who cares? If you go the fake, real, fake secret way, you get led to an adamantine door. If you stick 3 swords in the doors, it destroys the swords. You get led to the throne room. There's pillars that go up to the ceilings, doors in the back, a gem in the corner, a throne, and more of those devil heads. If you touch the pillars, you fizzy lifting drink float to the top of the room and will float to the northwest part of the room because there's a gentle breeze for some reason. In the
Not a gentle breeze for some reason. The devil heads are sucking you in.
back of the room are 2 more devil heads. One sucks anything that gets within 3 feet of it. It takes your stuff and pops you out right here. This dungeon can off. I hate these teleporting take your equipment portals. The other one pops you in this room that has a little bit of water draining in it and holes all over so it doesn't flood. Aseric tells you that, haha, you're trapped and the only thing you can do is open this door and die, which leads to a room with 6 flying swords and 3 shields that interpose to take hits from the swords. If you walk in through this way, the same thing happens, but the purple door turns green and only 2 swords attack you at a time. If you do it again 2 more times to get all the swords, they get stronger by having a +1 and 1 more hit point. If you open this door, it's a dusty room. If you open this door, there's a table with a mummy on it. In its head is an amethyst worth 5,000 gold pieces. And if you take it, the mummy turns into a mummy lord with no spells or legendary actions and half the XP, but is resistant to fire damage because it has a ring of fire resistance. In the corner is a crater with a red gem. The gem lets you cast wish once, but the wish is distorted and explodes, killing everyone in a 15-foot radius on initiative count 0. The throne at the back of the room has a
And of course, it has all the dead bodies and stuff around it, which is oddly the only room in the tomb that has anything like that. So maybe, once again, kind of your hint, don't mess with it. The gem also has evil aura and a bunch of other stuff. There's plenty of warnings there if you are being intentional.
rod and a crown. The rod has a silver and gold end. If you put the crown on, you can't take it off unless the gold end is touched to the crown. If you touch the silver end of the rod to the crown, the wearer is
instantly snuffed out, turning into a fetid powder that can't be brought back to life no matter what.
If you put the rod into a part on the throne that you have to investigate for, it opens up to a rainbow stairway with a bronze key on a black stair. The mithril door at the top of the stairs has a cup-like depression. If you put either the first or second key in it, you take lightning damage. If you put the silver end of the rod in it, you teleport nude back at the beginning of the dungeon. Oh my god. If you put the gold end, the doors open. If you stab the door, the entire room floods with blood from all those who died in the tomb, and a bunch of different spells will do different things and fix it, which is kind of interesting, but who's gonna stab the door? And now, finally, you enter the fake treasure room. There's a bronze urn with an Afridi in it that grants the party 3 wishes. I'm not kidding, it actually does. There's a sarcophagus with a Sarek written on the top of it. Inside of it is a broken staff of the Magi. There's 2 iron chests that are triple locked and can't be moved. If you fail any of the 6 attempts on unlocking them, you are shot with a poison needle that does 12d6 poison damage. Inside of them is 10,000 gems, each worth 50 gold pieces, and 10,000 platinum pieces in the other. But if you get 13 miles away from the tomb, each of the 10,000 gems turns into a 1 gold piece quartz, and the 10,000 platinum turns into copper. If you move the northwest statue, it reveals a ring that opens a chute to the next room. This next room is a hallway with a door and a key. It opens if you put the first key in it. Then in the room is a rectangle with another key in it. If you put the first key in it, it explodes. If you put the second key in it 3 times, it opens. Then the floor rises up. If you're still here on initiative count 10, you just are crushed and die. On the rising floor is another goddamn door in the floor, and if you pull it, it reveals a bunch of treasure, including all the stuff any of the characters lost while going through the teleporting naked portals. If you touch any of the treasure, a humanoid dusty figure appears and dissipates in 3 rounds if you ignore it. But if you do any damage to it, it takes 1 point of energy, and spells do energy equal to the level it was cast. If you give it 50 energy, it turns into a ghost. However, if you touch the skull, it turns into a demi-lich, which is a Sarek, and attacks the most powerful party members first. It also has Trap the Soul, which sucks you into one of the gems if you fail a con save, and if you smash any of the gems, that character comes back. And yeah, if you kill the ghost and the demi-lich, all the treasure is yours. Which...
Or if you just take the treasure, all of the treasure is yours. If you leave the demi-lich alone, the demi-lich is left alone. But once again, Iron Men and Visage Grim do more than meets the viewer's eye, so move the damn statue. And you've left and found my tomb. You walk out and you turn left twice, because one thing he didn't mention is that if you just follow the hallway after you walk out of there, you're going to end up hitting the pits. And a lot of the things he's missing, where there's other things that could happen and other things where you got to search more and think more, once again goes back to that 5th edition mindset where a lot of the thinking is done for you. Passive perception is a okay thing for dungeon masters to not have to worry about them. Hey, roll a spot check for me. Okay, well, you don't see anything. Well, damn, there must be something there. Passive perceptions are a terrible thing for players thinking to look for things. Why am I going to, man, can I roll a spot? I want to see if I see anything. Well, of course you don't. Your passive perception didn't see it.
Which includes 97 small gems worth 10 gold pieces each, 3 huge gems, 4 magic weapons, a defender, a sword of vengeance, a berserker axe, and a spear of backbiting. And you can also come up with 12 random potions, 6 random spell scrolls of 5th level or lower, a magic ring, a magic rod, a magic staff, and 3 wondrous items. So yeah, there's a lot of payoff for beating this dungeon. Going through all that awfulness and pain eventually leads to a very sizable treasure hoard that is, maybe to some, worth it to beat this dungeon. However, I still don't find it fun. Every turn and decision you make will often lead you to death or a complete middle finger to your character. I fully believe Gygax wrote this as a middle finger to his players, a way to say f*** you and make them dislike Dungeons & Dragons. If you want to punish someone, play the Tomb of Horrors. If you want to give yourself and your friends a headache, play the Tomb of Horrors. If you want to ruin your campaign by throwing this seemingly legendary hard dungeon into it to challenge your players, but eventually have them all die and your players leave your campaign because that was the worst thing they had ever endured, play the Tomb of Horrors. Oh yeah, and the poem. At the beginning of the dungeon, there's a...
Don't put the Tomb of Horrors in your campaign. If you're not going to bother to read it and understand what it's for, don't run the Tomb of Horrors. If you don't know how to play a role-playing game as the character and not as a video game player, don't run the Tomb of Horrors. This is not a... The Tomb of Horrors is not an adventure to be run by a Jenny D. It is an adventure. It was designed by and designed for very, very advanced players who have been playing for a long time. It is not there for basic people it's not there to be run as part of your campaign like some of these other modules are. And if you're not going to run it if you're not going to follow the instructions that are in the front of the damn module that tell you to outline this stuff for your players, that's the biggest thing. Read the damn module before you try and run it. And I mean, read the stuff in the beginning that talks about why you run it the way you do.
Poem that effectively tells you how to beat the whole dungeon, but it's so convoluted that it's nearly impossible to understand because it doesn't give a lot of details. I've run the dungeon for numerous groups of people who I consider to be pretty smart, and even the smartest of them lost track of the poem. So here's how it works. Sarah congratulates you on your powers of observation, so make of this whatever you wish, for you will be mine in the end no matter what. This is just Asaric being cocky. Go back to the Tormentor, or through the Arch. This refers to the first room. You can go through the arch or peel back the wall, though the flavor text describes it as a torturer, so there's no clues that it's a tormentor. Shouldn't it be a tormented? Or is the guy on the other side the one who is torturing? He's grabbing at the edges of like a cage, so this text doesn't make any sense. And the second great hall you'll discover. Shun green if you can, but night's good colors are for those of great valor. This refers to the green devil faces, shun it, and
No, it doesn't.
the black orbs that lead you to the chapel.
It refers to the different orbs that are in the room and telling you which ones to go to.
Shun green does not refer to the orbs, as the green orbs don't mean anything. I have to assume that shun green has to assume to the devil faces that you constantly find around the place. Also, one of the rocks on top of the archway glows green, so ice, but it's never described as green, it's described as an olive hue. So, what? If shades of red stand for blood, the wise will not need sacrifice aught but a loop of magical metal. You're well along your march. This refers to the red orb as it leads you to the room with the ring of protection, the snakes, and the skeletons. The blood, I think, has to do with the fact that you'll encounter skeletons and snakes. 2 pits along
The loop of magical metal. See, he's already off of this anyway. The loop of magical metal refers to putting the orb into the wall hole in the chapel. You'll also notice that there's red described in that room that you need to avoid. The red orbs in the orb hall lead to encounters.
the way will be found to lead to a fortuitous fall, so check the wall. The third pit in the room leads to the false ending. This is actually one of the best clues in the game because never in the rest of the dungeon are there 2 to 3 pits in a line except for the first room, and the party has to assume they're well beyond the first room at this point. So this clue actually works because they'll check the wall in the bottom of that pit. Oh wait, except that the wall on that pit is painted to look like stone, so they'll open it, look down, not see a door, and then continue along, go, I don't know where we're supposed to go. These keys and those are most important of all. The keys that open a Sarac's tomb, you want to hold on to those, because if you lose them, you're f***ed. And beware trembling hands and what will maul. I have no clue what the trembling hands refers to. What will maul may be the steamroller, or maybe the entire dungeon. If you find the false, you find the true. I think it refers to the fake ending and all the real fake false secret doors. And into the columned hall you'll come.
No, it does not. It refers to the specific. It refers to that specific. Find the false, find the true in the Juggernaut room. The trembling hands and what will maul is basically telling you to be cautious in the room that trembles and shakes, because you will get destroyed by that, especially in early first edition. That green slime is pretty much instant death. So that's in the trembling room. Everything in the poem is in order. And when you find the false, find the true, the room, you find a false secret door right there before you go to the Juggernaut. There's a secret door there, but it basically just opens into the wall, behind which is another secret door that is the hallway to the columned halls.
And there, the throne that's key and keyed. This is the throne room with the rod being used as a key twice. It would be cool if there was kind of like a gold reference here.
It's keyed to the crown, and it's the key to the door.
As you would only want to use the gold end, or a warning against silver, like shun silver or something like that. The Iron Men of Visage Grim do more than meets the viewer's eye. Move the statue. You've left and found my tomb, and now your souls will die. Go left and you find a Sararak. So yeah, the poem doesn't help all that much. It just kind of forewarns two vague things that the players can maybe figure out. So we were in the Tomb of Horrors with my friends, and we went through it. And it took about 4 hours, and they were tired after 1 hour of not figuring out a single room and trying to piece together this puzzle with level 20 characters, and they died at the steamroller. So here's what they had to say about it.
What do you think of this dungeon, Spencer? Tyler.
It's awful. It's awful because it's not made to be fun. It's made just to fuck you over.
Yeah, that's what it is. Is that it's like how many of the things that happened did we actually have the opportunity to roll for?
The hint.
How many of the things that happened did we get a chance to roll for? How many of the things that happened because you didn't take your time and think things through before doing stuff? And it's not meant to fuck you over. It's meant to teach you that there are consequences for your actions, and you should be deliberate and intentional before you do them.
That you have is like the night is what you should go to. Night is dark, and then you just walk into this little hole right here and you die.
Yeah, and you die.
It's not fun.
So is this dungeon like a gauntlet for tough players? Like, is this like, it's like, oh, if you're really good at D&D, if your character's super powerful, is this like a gauntlet for them?
No, it feels more like it's just like the DM against the players. Like it has nothing to do with.
That's exactly what it is. It's a DM against the players moment. That's the entirety of the dungeon.
No, it's not. It is not the DM. It is the tomb versus the players, is what it is. And they say it without knowing that they say it. Because they rely on their characters to get them through the gauntlet, that is why they fail. It is not a test for characters. It is a test for players. That's why the DM is supposed to play it with a severe poker face and not let any hints fall out, not let any clues be put out in tone of voice and that sort of thing. Because if the DM hints or points in one direction or another, it eliminates the thinking process for the players.
So yeah, that's the Tomb of Horrors. I think I've said everything I needed to say, and those are kind of our final thoughts on the entirety of this old legendary dungeon. I understand the legends behind it and why it's so renowned, but I simply don't think it should be a dungeon that is sought after to put into your campaigns. Now, I was going to end this video with me going over my version of the Tomb of Horrors, and I'm still going to do that, but I've been editing for 20 hours straight, and I really need to get this video out. So I will have that video up very soon on my version of the Tomb of Horrors that hopefully you guys can use if you really want to run this dungeon, but put a new, more modern Jacob twist on it, I guess. So, yeah. Thanks for watching this really long video, and that's the end of the video.
Okay, so there you go, guys. He has a version where you can put the training wheels on the Tomb of Horrors if you really want training wheels on. You can make it 5th edition compatible where it holds the player's hands and they can just make a bunch of rolls, and they can have a character sheet stat that solves all the problems for them. The long and short of it is that he just does not understand the dungeon. And to be fair, he's not the only one who has this problem. It is kind of like alignment. One of the most misunderstood things in Dungeons and Dragons, particularly by the modern player base, because it is a relic of when this was a thinking man's game. It is a relic of when this was all theater of the mind, when this was about when the people who were attracted to Dungeons and Dragons were people of a more, I guess you could say, a more intellectual class, a more well-read class, one that the kind of people who played games like Myst and Riven and Zork and other puzzle games that you were trying to think through, where the entire thing was trying to solve the puzzles and trying to figure out the logic of the puzzles themselves. And it says it all. If you would like to include this game in your campaign, nobody should ever want to include this adventure in your campaign. It's not meant for that. It's not designed to be part of a campaign. It's not designed to be part of a story. It's not designed to have a bunch of hooks. It's not designed for your players that you've put a lot of time and effort and investment into. It is there for the players to test themselves and how they react, how they interact with their characters and their environment. You'll notice that there are like 5 monsters in this entire dungeon, and almost all of them are completely optional and not something almost all can be sidestepped. There's a reason for that, because it's not about hacking and slashing. It's not about what pluses you have on dice. It's about what's between your ears and how much you pay attention and how much you think things through. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this. I will pick a video that is more in line with general gaming advice or something from him to do a reaction to next. But as I said, I'm not a huge fan of his, and this video is a big part of the reason why I'm not, because it just highlights the complete ignorance of certain things in the modern player base. And if you agree with me, let me know below. But otherwise, like, share, and subscribe. And I appreciate you sticking out for what's probably going to end up, when I edit this, being an hour-long video. And I will see you guys next time.